Hello, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're located. And on behalf of Black Mental Health Canada, I wish to welcome you. My name is Shani Ellis Alman, and I'm joining you by way of Black Mental Health Canada studio for our podcast, Coping in Color, Navigating Black Mental Health. I'm your host today, Shani, a trainer, a speaker, an educator, a social worker and counselor and founder of Mind Strong, Live Free Mental Health and Wellness. And I'm here with Svens. Svens Telemaque is a community advocate for prison reform. He's passionate about rehabilitating and reintegrating incarcerated and recently released individuals through his work with Union United Church. As a facilitator, he's empowered many through various workshops and federal institutions across Quebec and Ontario. He does training for parole officers across Quebec on culturally sensitive approaches to working with Black men in the system. And we all know that that kind of service and education is much needed. Svens continues to demonstrate his unwavering commitment to breaking down barriers and fostering positive change for those affected by the criminal justice system. Svens, are you there and how are you doing? Svens, I can't hear you. No. Bear with us for a second, listeners, while we just work out the audio. I swear he was just speaking to me a minute ago.
Can you
Hi,
hear me now?
Svens. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I don't know what was going on with the tech, but yes, thank you so much for having me, Shani. It's really a blessing.
It's wonderful to have you here, and I look forward to our conversation. Can you start by telling us, is there a quote, a proverb, or the works of an influential person that guides you in your work and gives you inspiration?
Oh, there's many, but the very first one that comes to my mind, I know it's an African proverb that everyone's familiar with. The quote goes, "It takes a village to raise a child," but there's another part to that quote. It takes a village to raise a child, but the child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Wow, I never knew that. It kind of gives a whole new meaning to the quote, doesn't it?
Most definitely. And just in the work that I do in regards to prevention as well as reintegration, I feel like too often we forget just how important it is for us to embrace people
Yes,
from all walks of life.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think it also gave a whole new understanding to the Black Panther movie for me as well, to be honest, right?
Hmm.
Um, can you tell our listeners about the work that you do?
Well, on my end, I do different types of work. So, in regards to prevention, I present presentations at different schools all across the country. In regards to prevention, I also have done juvenile detention, at-risk youth. On another note, I also run a mentoring program with the West Island Black Community Association for young Black boys, which is really focused on providing them with different examples and different reference points of success. Because too often, Black boys don't see enough of variety and success in Black men, from a firefighter to a fashion designer to, whatever it is. On another note, I work with Union United Church on different levels when it comes to outreach and community. That's what I'm responsible for. So I help with seniors programs. I help with our prison ministry, which is going very well. That includes me going into prisons across Quebec, doing presentations there to help with mental resilience and help people maintain emotional fortitude, mental fortitude, and self reliance. Counseling, helping people when they come home, everything from A to Z. Because a lot of people, when they come home, sometimes they don't have supports, especially people that have spent longer time incarcerated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I imagine for that group, the rate of recidivism would be much higher, especially when you don't have a home or supports to come back to.
Funny enough, Black people have the lowest rate of recidivism.
Really?
In
Oh,
federal prison, we have the lowest rate of recidivism, but they would have us to think the opposite way. And when it comes to federal prison, this is anyone doing 2 years or more.
yes.
Most people, when they come home, they're not trying to go back. When it comes to provincial prison, which is 2 years or less, the recidivism rate as a whole is very high. It's in like the 60%, something around that percentile here in Quebec, at least.
Yes.
Right at
Yes.
Bordeaux, it's very high.
What do you think contributes to the rate of recidivism? I think you said on the federal level
Yeah.
being a lot, I guess, disproportionately less than other population groups for Black men.
Just off the top of my head, one of the things that come to my mind um, is when you find yourself in a federal institution amongst people that are doing life.
Mm. Yes.
If you get a 10-year, 5-year, 8-year sentence, you ain't trying to go back.
Yeah. Yes.
Not trying
Yeah.
to go back.
Absolutely.
Like you see, you see where the end of that rope is. Like, why would you want to go back?
Yes. No, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yes. How were you drawn into this type of work?
Firsthand experience. To be quite honest with you, I have firsthand experience. Growing up in the States, I've been incarcerated myself, so
Mhm.
I've already, kind of like have an understanding to certain things. However, I think 2015, 2016, I had a friend of mine that was studying law and social work, and she was telling me, "Look, you need to come volunteer in this prison." So I decided to come along, and it pulled me in. It pulled me
Yes.
in.
I pulled you in. No, that's great. And now that you're there to kind of give back and to give your to give education, to give your knowledge on to other people.
Yeah, and also to learn, because I've learned so much too.
Yes.
Stepping in there, what it really means to be mentally resilient, how to control your emotions. People that are incarcerated, I'm telling you, it's a lot. It takes a lot of mental fortitude for you to be able to just exist in that space.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Um, I want to ask you, the research suggests that Black men are disproportionately rooted into the criminal justice system. That could be when it, like, as it pertains to mental health, that could be for minor offenses, and they're just disproportionately sent into to jail or prison more so than other groups. What, based on your own experience, would you say, that research is correct, and to what extent?
So I'll even add to that research. So there's different aspects to it. So on another level, like let's just take Quebec for example, right? Uh, I mean Canada. If we look at Canada, I believe the Black population is about 3.5, somewhere around that percentile. That's where we represent. That's the numbers that we take up in Canada. There's about 3.5% of the population in Canada is Black, but we make up about almost 10% of the population in prison
Yes.
on a
Yes.
federal level. So now people interpret that in so many different ways. Some people interpret that to be okay, Black people are more violent or Black people are more criminally active. Not necessarily. The way I see that is we always get the the rough side of the justice system. There's a lot of forms of alternative justice that exist that most of the time we don't benefit from, and statistics prove that, especially Black men, because there's not a lot of Black women in the prison system. I've
Yes.
done federal, provincial, like in Quebec, for example, there might be 2 women. Last time I checked, there was one.
Mm.
There's not a lot of Black women in the system like that. Um, what I will say is, and I just find that people interpret that the wrong way. The way I see it is Black men will end up with harsher sentences, will end up, and I don't, that's pretty much what it is, even when it comes to parole. And a lot of these men, a lot of them are stuck in medium institutions. And for listeners that are not familiar with the system here in Canada, this should give you an example. Let's say you get a federal sentence, right? You're going to do 2 years or more. You go to a reception center, you sit there for a while, and then they see where they're going to place you on a maximum, medium, or minimum level,
Yes.
right? So you have a certain amount of time you have to do on the maximum level, depending on the gravity of your crime. Most of our Black men are where they're stuck in the maximum and medium institutions. Even when they qualify to cascade down, a lot of them are held back. I've seen some guys that have been stuck in the medium for like 6 years, like with no bad reports, nothing going on. Like they should have been in a minimum much sooner. What does that mean? Doing time in a maximum and minimum institution or even medium is like night and day. In a minimum
Yes.
institution, you could have some contact with people. You can go outside to go to work. You can do certain things that's going to help speed up your reintegration.
Right. Yes. So, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think there is a bias on, like, the institutional or systemic level when it comes to the criminal justice system? Um,
100%.
yeah. Yeah.
100%. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's proven statistically. They even have statistics with Globe and Mail from 2022 that show that Black males, when they were applying for parole, I believe it was like 20% or higher, Black and Indigenous men, even when they had the same charge, even if they had the same kind of like profile, Black men were denied like 24% more
Mm.
for parole
Yes.
than their white counterparts. So like it's definitely that. Another thing to mention, a lot of these prisons, right, they find themselves where? Like out in the outskirts in the country somewhere.
Yes.
So
Disconnected from everything.
disconnected from everything. So you get staff that are what? Disconnected from everything too.
Yes.
And they don't know necessarily the culture. They're not culturally sensitive. There's a lot of different issues with that. And I feel like all of it is interconnected, from school to children's protection. All of this stuff is connected to each other. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of it reminds me of prison. When I go to a school, if I go to Bathshaw, which is like children's protection, or if I go to a prison, I feel like I'm in the same place.
Mm. Yes. Yes.
Very similar.
So I'm gonna ask you a question. I had the opportunity to speak at some point in time with like probation and parole officers as well as
Mhm.
correction officers within the Ontario area. And something that was brought up was a lot of like the and you have to excuse me if I don't have all the terminology correct, but like um the like the group homes where they were supporting criminally involved youth specifically were like in very remote areas, like far away from their family, far away from any urban centers. And because of their remote location, they weren't places where many Black people, like Black families, moved to. And as a result, they had no Black staff, and they had difficulty retaining Black staff because of where they're, the remote location that they're in. Moreover, the issue even came that for one of the group houses specifically supported Black girls. And, even the stores in that area didn't carry Black hair products or even combs that could go through Black hair. So there was that, in terms of even being able to access the things that, a young Black person needs to maintain their appearance or their personal hygiene, there wasn't the access, and even more so, there wasn't even, a community of Black people in that area to even say that, we're able to employ Black people to be able to have, some representation or some people who can understand the needs of these Black youth. Just kind of what has been your experience in terms of, having this disproportionate rate of Black people, within these institutions, and their culture entirely being kind of left out of it or on the margins, and not having that access to the things that make you feel comfortable and safe, and yeah.
So this is exactly what I mean by I feel like it's a copy and paste, right?
Mhm.
So right now, in Quebec, or better yet, Montreal, I'm really proud to say that there's an initiative where all of the social workers that work for, um, I don't know what to call it, BAFSHA, which was pretty much children's protection, whatever.
Yes.
All the Black employees have gotten together to create a committee to kind of like help with issues like this. So, for example, when it comes to that, they're creating packages for that. Myself, as well as one of my colleagues that I work with, Amanda Maxwell, we've advocated for guys that were incarcerated at a minimum institution for them to get products, like
Yes.
shea butter and stuff for their skin, stuff for their hair. So it's the same thing across the board. And I can give you two examples. So I remember there was a high school here in Montreal North. The high school basically said that Black boys could not wear do-rags. Fast forward now, there was certain federal institutions that were saying that you can't wear do-rags because they're gang affiliate, like they're related to gang activity.
Yes.
So the Bureau of the Federal Investigator had to step in and say, listen, this has nothing to do with gang activity. This is part of their culture. You guys gonna have to stop whatever bans you have in place immediately. But if someone were to wear a scrunchie, whatever color they are, there's no problem with that. If someone would wear a bandana to hold their hair up, there's no problem with that.
Hmm.
It's a very big disconnect because they're not culturally safe.
Yes.
There's not a sense of cultural safety, awareness, sensitivity, knowledge, like all of it. There's a very big lack.
Yes.
And it's the same thing. For example, like in Ontario, most federal prisons are like hours away. So you get a staff that reflect those areas. And sometimes those areas, the only place where these people encounter black people might be in prison.
Mm, yes.
So it's I mean, I don't I imagine that they place some prisons far away to kind of like keep people away, like people that might be quote unquote dangerous. But at the end of the day, people don't really think about community when they build these structures. They're
Yes.
not thinking, how can we make this as accessible as possible so that these children could continue to have visits or, you know what I mean, be in contact with family. Like, I don't think that's one of the, you know,
Yes.
dec- deciding factors. They're probably like, okay, well, some in my opinion too, I think that they build prisons in certain areas to develop the economy because it's a business, right?
Yes.
If I
Abs-
build this prison in no man's land, these people will have a job.
Yes. No, I hear that loud and clear.
Hmm.
I think I was taken aback by something that you said, kind of in regards to so I'm thinking I had read the book Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard, I believe. And, something that she speaks of is that at like an institution for Black boys who are criminally involved, the staff within the place, every time the boys got together, because there was a group of Black boys, as soon as the Black boys got together and started establishing a sense of community and talking and laughing, the staff thought that they were conspiring to do something, to do something problematic or to get into trouble. So, they actually ended up complaining that, these boys are, they're getting into trouble or they're planning something and they're concerned. But there was no basis, and there ended up being nothing to validate. So, I'm reminded by the fact that, as you said, with the do rags, that because especially it's black black youth, there's almost an assumption that, this must be, you know something negative. This can't be something cultural. This can't be something, communal. This must be something, gang affiliated, or something, dangerous, or something that we need to kind of stop right away before it turns into something. Do you find that is the experience, especially when it comes to Black youth, that, we all know that they are over surveilled, they're overly monitored? Do you think that, it is so nuanced that everything, such as getting together or wearing even a do-rag, is perceived by people outside of the culture to be something dangerous? And this happens more so with, I guess, Black and Indigenous peoples.
I feel like you just read a page straight out of the OCI report, which is basically a report that investigates all of the federal prisons. You just basically read a page. That's exactly the same issue that these men deal with in prison. Whatever they do, it's perceived under the lens of gang activity. Like,
Yes.
to give you an example that's really funny, but not like, two people that I've met recently, they said, look, we organized a Black History event inside the prison, right? Because we didn't like what was going on. So we organized this event. Volunteers came by. Everything went super well. We took pictures, right? And they
Mhm.
put up, I think, like a sign like this. It means something in the Jamaican culture. I can't remember what, but something
Yes.
to do with unity or something like that. And they said that they were doing gang signs. Like, gang signs how? Like, these are volunteers. Like, this is nothing to do. You guys are just completely ignorant, and you guys don't want to know, because everything is, if I have guys that tell me, look, we can't be two or three guys around each other, because as soon as it's two or three Black dudes, it's something perceived as gang activity. It's the same thing for our youth. Another example that I could give you that's really messed up, during COVID, we had this incentive with the government where you could get money. In Quebec, they called it PCU, where you would get money if you lost your job because of COVID or something like that.
Yes. Mhm.
So they came out with an article basically saying gangs are taking advantage of that incentive. But the problem is, in that article, you see a group of Black boys with book bags on, in front of a bus stop, which so happens to be in front of a church in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And the newspaper basically says gang members taking advantage of this government incentive. In there's like a little subtitle that says, and you see a picture of them, and the subtitle says a picture of a gang from that year. When this circulates online, Shani, this is what's crazy. When it starts to circulate online and it gets traction, the boys that were actually in the picture are like, that's impossible. I've never taken this government incentive. And this is not from 2019. This is a picture from 2008. I was in high school in this picture. Why are they applying this picture to something that happened in like 2019, 2020? So this is why I tell you, even though these kids had backpacks on and they were in front of a bus stop waiting for the bus, for some reason, the Journal de Montréal saw them as what? Gang members, because that's how they framed them.
Yes,
They're being
absolutely.
sued right now. These youth are they got together and they're suing the Journal de Montréal because it just doesn't make sense. Enough is enough.
Yes. No, that's great. I am very much enjoying talking to you, Svens, and I'm reluctant to move on to our next question because I know that we have a break coming up. So maybe we can break now and then we can get right back into this.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. So, where we left off, I don't want to go too far from that. Um, you know, there's I hear all the time, when it comes to Black people, especially within the school system. In the States, they'll say the school to prison pipeline. In Canada, I've heard more like, is it push out or is it drop out?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what's happening. And generally in the research and in the literature, they talk about Black youth being adultified earlier. So, Black boys being seen as men and kind of given that criminalized label. Black girls being seen as women and sexualized much earlier. And moreover, the research also goes on to say that by grade 4, I believe the statistic is, by grade 4, a lot of Black youth begin feeling or seeing that teachers and principals are treating them differently than the other kids at school, which oftentimes demoralizes them and resulting in them, not feeling safe within that space, maybe caring less about their schoolwork and their performance and wanting to go to school less. I know that you do kind of some prevention and some mentoring. Do you think these statements are true? And kind of what are you seeing, having, a foot in the door and talking to these youth?
I think it applies 100%. And I feel like in Canada, like I can speak for Quebec right now, they're playing a very dirty game sometimes with our youth. For example, they'll have your children take part in programs that they don't really understand. Sometimes the parents don't fully understand. And you'll find yourself ending up in some kind of, vocational program that you never wanted to be part of. Or you might find yourself repeating the same grade twice and not really understanding, you know what I mean, what that means.
Yes.
I've had youth. I remember one time, I remember vividly, I was at one school that we were doing the mentoring program for, and we were doing a writing workshop that day. And one of the youth, which is very respectable, like doesn't have any issues, he walks into the class. I could clearly see he's been crying. I can clearly see he is livid. So I asked him, like, yo, do you want to you don't got to take part in this right now, you know what I mean, do you want a moment? And he's like, no, 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 it's fine. And then he starts to get a bit disrespectful, like, when I write, who is going to be reading this? And he starts to have an attitude. He continues. So I just kind of like let him blow his steam. At the very end, when I pull him to the side, he's like, man, I'm so mad. I'm so upset. Sorry about the way I was behaving. But I'm like, what's going on? He's like, man, they had me sign up to some program where I repeated the same grade twice. And even though I pass all my classes, they're telling me that I'm going to have to repeat again. And they didn't explain that to me in the beginning.
Yes.
So his level, that sense of deception and betrayal, he was just angry. And they didn't explain that to him as clear as possible. I got another youth that I've been mentoring for like 3 years now. Same thing. They sent him some paperwork. Teacher told him one thing, and then boom, he finds himself in some vocational program.
Yes.
So this happens quite often, more than people think. That if your child is not the best on the academic level, they'll dissuade your youth so quick to go into some program that they may not necessarily want to join.
Yes. And you keep on mentioning mental resilience. That's a word that you said from the very beginning, and I even jotted it down because I wanted to come back there. So I think now's the opportune time. you know I imagine, based on kind of the line of conversation that we're having, this takes a toll on Black youth from a very early age, right? And it sounds like you see this, from youth and from adolescence, even into men who are within the correction system.
Right.
And when you talk about mental resilience, can you explain to our listeners what that is, and kind of what you're seeing, how this impacts people's kind of mentality or psychological well-being, and what does it mean to develop mental resilience?
So for me, one of the examples that I use the most is watches. Right.
Mhm.
When you purchase a watch, you'll probably have a watch that is water resistant or waterproof. And I like to tell men, like, no one is adversity proof. No matter how tough you are, no matter how, you know, strong, or whatever word you want to use, no one is adversity proof. However, we all have different levels of mental resilience. We can both go through the same thing, and it affects us in different ways. So mental resilience to me is all about maintaining your well-being while you go through adverse situations, circumstances, environments, whatever you want to call it, relationships. The capacity for oneself to maintain their well-being as best as possible, to uh, be resilient in the face of betrayal, abandonment, rejection, injustice, all of those things, like the five wounds of the soul, because sometimes you're dealing with all of them at the same time. Humiliation,
Yes.
it's finding different ways, different coping mechanisms to just maintain your well-being while you go through what you go through.
What for those listeners who personally identify with the conversation that we're having, what are some tools that someone could use or someone could build to help with their mental resilience?
Oh, there's a lot, but the ones that I like to talk about the most,
Yeah.
the very first thing that I like to break down, that I feel like most people don't think about too much, is optimism.
Mm.
Optimism, pessimism, And some people say, look, I'm not an optimist, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. I like to really break down the attributes of a pessimist and an optimist so people can kind of really get to understand, what is that really? How does that really look like? So you can kind of like have help in shifting. So for example, um, you know, I sometimes I use storytelling, but I'll give you an example. Like, I deal with a lot of people with life sentences, right? So sometimes I might start off with a story like this. When you get a life sentence, you're kind of like someone stranded out at sea. All you see is blue. That's it. As far as the eye can see, you only see blue.
Yes.
That blue might be an ocean of hopelessness. It might be despair, whatever you want to call it. There's three people on that boat. And for people listening, regardless of the adversity you're going through, there's three people facing it. There's the optimist version of you, the realist version of you, and the pessimist version of you. So now, what are the difference between the three? Both are realists. However, a realist sees reality and that's it. I'm stuck on this boat. That's where it stops. The problem is the pessimist doesn't just see reality. He or she distorts reality. It's not just about the fact that I'm stranded. You start to think about, oh my God, maybe there's sharks in the water. Maybe there's a storm coming, and you start distorting the reality that you're dealing with. The pessimist looks at reality, faces reality, however, is focused on, what can I do? What is possible? You know? And there's three P's that an optimist and pessimist have. You have permanence, you have pervasiveness, and you have personalization. And very quickly, the optimist sees everything as temporary. The pessimist sees everything as permanent. So they use language like always, never, right? Example, you're in a relationship, somebody decides to call it quits. If you're a pessimist, I'll never find love again.
Yes.
Personalization. Oh, you know what? She left me because I wasn't tall enough. I
Yes.
didn't make enough money, or whatever the case may be. You personalize things about you. And one of the things that will guarantee you to be miserable in life is to take everything personal.
Mm.
And then last but not least, pervasiveness. When you take one situation and you let it affect different areas of your life.
Yes. Yes.
The optimist, everything is temporary. My life is temporary. Joy is temporary. So I enjoy things while they're here. And as much as my suffering, may be very painful, it can't be permanent.
Yes. Yes.
And when it comes to personalization, the optimist, I will hold myself accountable. However, I'm not going to make everything about me, because everything is not about me. Sometimes it has nothing to do with you. you
Yes.
know and last but not least, pervasiveness. you know I tell a lot of guys a lot, sometimes when you're inside and you're trying to call family and they don't pick up, some of these guys go crazy because you have no sense of control, right? It's not like you can
Yes.
get a call back,
Yes.
at least legally. So it's like, what do you feel? You feel like, oh my God, what is my girlfriend doing? She's not picking up the phone. You know what I mean? Like, I tell them, like, listen, like I remember I had a conversation with one brother, and it would cause so much strife, because then you don't want to eat, you don't want to work out, you don't want to do this, because fear is a bottomless pit,
Mm.
but
Yes.
love is a mountain with no precipice. I tell them that all the time. Like, don't think about fearful thoughts, because it's always going to bring you down.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
and to close, like, it's not about the adversity, it's more about how you see that adversity, because sometimes adversity is a blessing in disguise.
Yes. Yes. No, I hear that outlook is everything. And I want to say, first of all, I found that immensely powerful. So thank you very much for gracing me and our listeners with that.
Oh, thank you, Shani.
Um, based on my work, my life, and my experience, And I don't believe it's wrongfully so, but there's oftentimes that Black boys and men, they have a lot of anger, anger with the system, anger at, the way they've been hurt or disadvantaged, in an unfair way. Do you have any tips for people in terms of managing that anger?
100%. The very first thing that's very painful to say is that that anger is really sadness most of the time.
Mm,
It's just as a boy, man, it's so much more masculine, quote unquote, to show anger rather than sadness. Like to give you a perfect example, like the other day here in the greater region of Montreal, we had a black boy, 10 years old, walking on someone's lawn. Some lady took some boiling water and threw it on this kid. And the news will not say her name. They keep saying a woman.
no, I haven't even heard of it to say how much is being publicized. But
Oh yeah,
yes.
they say a woman. And we're like, why is this woman not arrested yet?
Hmm.
This lady is already back home waiting to go to court. And like it has the black community, and even the wider community just like livid. Like how does that happen? And I was so angry, I couldn't move. I couldn't move. I was too livid. Like I stayed in my car. But what really hurt me is the fact that when I really took the time to think about it, I wasn't angry for real. I was sad.
Yes.
I was so sad that I was angry. And most of the time when you're angry, you're sad, but we won't say we're sad.
Yes.
You're sad because you're dealing with injustice because they're doing you wrong. But it shows up like the iceberg. It shows up as anger, but underneath everything is sadness. So
Yes.
for me is you got to channel that anger in a way that is constructive to you. Like for me, it was action. I couldn't let that happen and not do anything about it. Because if I if,
Yes.
if I don't do anything about it, I don't know, that anger ain't going nowhere. I gotta pose in action some kind of place. So
Yes.
one of the things that I think about is writing. You don't need to be a writer. You don't need to be the best. We're not talking about poetry here. We're talking about just emotionally mapping how you feel. So one of the things that I like to do with people is you take a piece of paper, kind of like a brainstorm. In the center of the paper, you write a circle. So let's say frustration. We'll use that word, right? So
Yes.
when I write it on the paper, the
Yes.
next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect that circle with everything that is feeding my frustration. So let's just say, I don't know, I'm going through, or someone is going through a divorce, right? And they feel frustrated. Very first thing I'm going to ask them, out of all of the emotions that you feel, what would be, if your emotions would be on a boat, or if your emotions would jump into a car, what would the car be named? Would it be named angry? Would it be named frustration? All these emotions together, do they fit under that umbrella? Okay, boom. We'll go with frustration. What is nourishing your frustration while you're going through this divorce? If they tell me, well, you know what, the children, be more specific. Or, well, if the children will be with me or be with her, and then I would just get them to name everything that is nourishing your frustration. The next thing you do, I want you to put an X over everything you cannot control. And I want you to circle everything that you can. Let's focus on the things that you can,
Yes.
because too often we have all this stuff going on in our mind. And it's as if I came to you, Shani, and I told you, yo, what's 75 divided by 32 multiplied to the third degree? You know, open parenthesis. Like that's how people move around in life too often. Like I gotta buy milk, gotta pick up the kids,
It's
gotta
overwhelming. It's debilitating completely.
exactly.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't write things down. When you don't write it down, you can't get it out of your head
Yes.
and find the right formula to deal with what you're dealing with.
I love
But
that.
first thing, yo, write it down. Stop keeping everything inside. The cheapest therapist you'll ever get will be a notebook from Dollarama or the dollar store, and just write down what are the things that are stressing you, and look at it from that point of view.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And thank you so much. Um, I'll let you know. I wrote down a million questions for you and I haven't got to a single one just because I'm really enjoying where this conversation is taking us. Um, okay. I want to ask, I do want to ask the question, what does it look like, or what are some of the challenges faced by Black men once they are being released from jail and prison in terms of, reintegrating back into the community? You hear about, getting a job and, being able to engage in a way, in my experience, Black men, they enjoy contributing. They have, a lot of them have strong work ethic, and they feel rewarded by being able to work and contribute. So, what does that mean for Black men as they're reintegrating, and what are some challenges maybe that are faced?
So first and foremost, number one, most of the time they'll have a parole officer that does not look like them. That's number
Mhm.
one. Why is that on top of the list? Because there will always be a lack of cultural safety for
Yes.
them. Number two, the way the system is built, it's not necessarily in their best interest. I can give you a perfect example. Employment. I have someone that I'm working with right now, spent his time in prison, came home, wants to work.
Yes.
They're telling him, well, he needs to do 2 months of volunteer work before he can work. Where's the logic in that? We're talking about a grown man just spent all his time in prison trying to get his life together. And basically, they're telling him, well, you had to have um, a proof that you had employment before you came out for you to do that right away, because he's in a closed halfway house. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, still, like, who makes up this rule? If the person finds a job, let the man work. So
Yes.
imagine you come out of prison, you've been waiting all this time, and now you're forced to do volunteer work for 2 months. I think it's beneficial to do volunteer work, but can
Yes.
that, why does that precede employment when you're a Black man and with a record? It's difficult to get a job. Some of these guys come home, they don't have all their IDs. So imagine you have some change. You can't even deposit a check. You can't cash a check because you need to go to the bank account. You need a bank account. You go to the bank and the bank's like, okay, you have two forms of ID. You're like, yeah, here's my health card and my prison ID. And they're looking at you weird, like, what? Prison ID?
Yes. Yes.
Can you come back another time? Let me call this person. Let me call that person. You spend 2 hours at the bank. I've had one person go to the bank 3 times because he didn't have two government IDs. So now
Right.
you come out, you want to get your license back. Mind you, for people listening, some people are like, yeah, but you put yourself in prison, blah, blah, blah. I totally understand. But if you guys really understood what the prison system was, you'd realize that, some of it does not rehabilitate at all. If not
Yeah.
most of it is just, I like for me, this is another issue. It's like, okay, you do something wrong, right? You definitely should need help in rehabilitating yourself and the way you think and what brought you to that point. But just putting somebody in a box and locking them up and letting time go by is not going to make that person any better.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that's why I'm against that. So you come home, you trying to get your license, everything is online now.
Yes.
I had
Yes.
some people go through, like, it's very draining to get your IDs back, to try to get employment. We're coming up with some creative ways on my end to see how we can kind of like dodge that, because I'm tired. Sometimes I've called people and I'm like, listen, you know, um, before these men even apply, because I don't want them to apply, get the interview, and here comes the conversation. Oh, you had a record, blah, blah, blah. I've had
Yes.
people say, look, we don't care about the record. And then when they find out the gravity of the crime the person has committed, 25 years ago, 20
Hmm.
years ago, 17 years ago, they don't care. I had one guy who was working like one of the best employees at this location. Like they highly esteemed this individual. Somebody escaped from a prison that had nothing to do with him. They just so happened to be at a community resource together at the same time one day, but there was plenty other people. The police
Yes.
showed up to his job to interview him about that. The man lost his job on the spot. The police
Yes.
themselves, they went back and they were like, listen, he's not involved with anything. We just wanted to ask him questions. And this said individual, you know what he said? He said, listen, I'm a law-abiding citizen. You guys couldn't call me to come to the police station?
Yes.
You guys know where I live. You guys know where I work. Like, why do you guys need to come to my job to harass me about something that I don't got nothing to do with? I'm not even a suspect in
Yes.
this. And he lost his job on the spot. Why? Because a lot of people are very weary about people that have committed crimes. They're like, oh my God, I don't, the police came here and and the police took the time to assure this person, like, look, he's not involved in anything. They don't care.
Yes. Yes. And I appreciate, and I want to touch back on how you said that, what people are going to use to excuse it is you put yourself in jail, which I think is a kind of a cop out because it ignores all of the other forces that, no, I don't think anyone ever woke up one day and said, today I'm going to get myself locked away for how many years, right? But oftentimes, there's a book stamped from the beginning. There's things that happen early on in a person's life, injustices and even, racism and, systemic and institutional things that kind of almost push certain groups into that direction that leads them into criminal involvement where, they're disproportionately affected by these things and others. So I think it's so important also to, if that's your mentality of thinking, oh, well, if you didn't dot, 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 you take a minute and step back and examine kind of why we're seeing disproportionately Black people than white people. Because it makes no sense other than the fact that, some groups are targeted more than others.
I got so many examples of this. Like, just off the top of my head, I could give you, I don't know how much time we have left, but I'll give you one or two. Like, first person that comes to my mind, because he was so tall, because he
Mhm.
was so tall, they took this guy's basketball career away from him. There was a situation with a young lady who just so happened to be a white lady, a white young girl. These were Black boys. Everything was consensual. They charged this man to 2 years. And this kid was just as young as everybody else, but because he was so tall and so big, he lost his
Yes.
career. You know what I mean?
He was
And
an automatic threat.
exactly. So this is just, I'm telling you, it's all across the board. There's just so much, so
Yes.
much.
My questions have taken almost all of our time. So what I want to ask you is there anything that you had really definitely wanted to make sure that you shared with our audience that maybe we haven't already covered that I can give you an opportunity to mention now as we're closing?
Um, I'll try to say these last things. So going back to
Mhm.
that quote that I shared, it takes a village to raise a child, but a child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. If you have children, nieces, nephews, or whatever, make sure you try your best to invest in their youth so they can, have something to do, something to keep their mind busy, something for them to discover their talents. You
Yes.
know, that's number one on a prevention tip. On another level, I would say if you have family members that are incarcerated, do not abandon them.
Yes.
Do not abandon them. Write them, show them support, show them love. A letter could do so much. We all make mistakes. Some mistakes, granted, are a lot worse than others. But at the very end of the day, for me at least, I don't feel like one mistake defines who you are. Mistakes don't define who you are. They define who you are in that moment, and just to show people grace, the same grace that you want to receive, and show people love, because love covers a multitude of sin, and too often people just judge. If you got a nephew or a niece or somebody incarcerated, don't just abandon them because you feel like, oh my God, how could Junior do X, Y, Z? I'm that Junior. I'm that one that, messed up, even though I had, the right things around me. But look at me now. I had one person invest in me that wouldn't give up on me. So don't give up on your children, and just, that's it, just keep on showing them the love that they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything that we can do, like, as listeners, as the community, the Black community, as allies, as family members, as people who are going through this themselves, to fight the bias and maybe give advocacy for those who need it? And even as you said, the packages that are being prepared that include like products that are culturally appropriate for Black people. Kind of what can we do, and what role do we have to play to try to not only change the system but make things a little bit easier for those people who are impacted by it?
Okay, wow, love that question. um I don't know if my contact information will be made available, but long story short, if anyone is in Ontario right now and they would like to do more work with prisons. And what I mean by work, I mean work as in creating programs where men that are in minimum institutions can be released for the day to do any type of community service work. You know, let me know if you're into that. If there's anyone that wants to support in any kind of way, you can contact me at the contact that will be provided. And
Can you like orally say it for our listeners as well?
yeah, anything, you can contact me at booksvens at svenstelemac.com. Booksvens at svenstelemac.com. And yeah, sending you all, love and light. And remember, it's not about what you go through, it's how you see it. That's the bigger problem.
Spence, it was a pleasure having you for the last hour. You enriched me in my own understanding, and I'm sure you did for our listeners as well. I look forward to replaying and sharing our conversation. I thank you for all the work that you do and the difference that you're making in the community. And on behalf of Black Mental Health Canada, I just want to thank you for your time today and the work that you do, and for sharing it with our audience.
Thank you so
So,
much.
to our audience, yeah, reach out to Svens, think about how you can help, how you can make a difference, and thank you for tuning in.